Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to say thank you very much to FHA for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here to speak with you today. I've been given the topic of talking about alternative protein in Asia. This is something that's starting to gain more and more weight. Naturally, the EU and the US are still leading the way on this, but companies are paying more and more attention to the opportunities in Asia. I'm going to talk about both the threats and the opportunities, but realistically, when we come to Asia, there are far more factors weighing up in the opportunity column, and we're going to touch on some of those through this. If we just start off though, I want to go through some of the major trends in Asia and see how some of these are going to have an impact on the evolution of alternative protein through Asia. First of all, one of the key things is really that sort of health link with food. In Asia, there tends to be more association with food safety here, but the nutritional quality and some of the factors that we look at in, say, Western Europe and the US, they are starting to gain more weight through Asia. And this is one of the key factors that's driving the sort of attractiveness of alternative protein products. Product affordability, it's important to bear in mind when we're looking at animal protein, is that affordability generally is one of the main concerns when we look at the sort of the meat opportunity through Asia holistically. There is some polarization, so we see in China, for example, even with some of the challenges economically over the last year, there has still been that demand for high quality beef products, for example. So product affordability, whilst important, there is certainly nuances to that through the region. When we come down, channel shift and e-commerce, we're starting to see more and more of a shift, both at retail and in food service, towards the online channel. And that has important implications both for marketing, it enables greater scrutiny of products, but importantly, this is helping to drive the growth of alternative meat products, and we'll touch on that a little later. Supply chain modernization, there is starting to be more and more digital penetration through that supply chain. And this is lending itself to sort of product innovation. It's also starting to try to give opportunities to bring down some of the cost in that supply chain. But one thing that is imperative for a lot of these alternative products to expand is going to be that continued modernization of that supply chain. Sustainability and ESG, so environmental, social, and governance. These are often different in terms of how they manifest themselves in Asia when we compare, say, animal welfare through Europe and the US. But this is starting to get a bit of traction in some Asian markets. It's still very much a niche, but there are questions as to whether this is going to gain more and more momentum over the next decade or so. And finally, I mean, there is really an aspect where we're starting to look, where is the value going to be? And if you're looking at this from the perspective of a meat company in the US or Europe, naturally, we've known this for a while that Asia is clearly going to be an important area, but this is starting to gain more and more weight, and companies are starting to wake up to this fact. So really for meat, yes, Asia is going to be a clear point, but there is opportunities to move into alternatives, because again, when we look at these products, often the margins associated with them tend to be often more attractive than what we see with meat. So if we go into alternative proteins straight away, one thing we need to sort of understand is sort of what is actually driving this whole system. And so we've started developing this thing which we're calling the positive feedback loop for alternative proteins. It really starts off with the intangibles. And there are three really of these: health, animal welfare, and the environment. Now, when we look in Western markets where this trend sort of started, the environment and animal welfare tend to also feature into the decision-making process. When we come to Asia, these are very minor, and health tends to be the main factor driving alternative proteins through the region. Two others which we don't see much in the Western markets, but are certainly the case through sort of Southeast Asia, China, etc., is food safety. That's certainly something that companies are starting to market on here, and just trendiness. If you look at how a lot of these companies are pushing the products in China, it's through KOLs and a range of other influencers. Developing these sort of trendy image around the products is certainly something that's helping to push the products forward. When we start to see these intangibles going, that is starting to drive customer acquisition. And with that, as these companies are starting to expand, that is obviously pushing capital into the space. The degree of customer acquisition often tends to have a lot to do with the amount of capital availability, and that sometimes supersedes the product quality. But again, we are starting to see more and more sophisticated investing in the space. When we have that, the question is, where does this capital go? And this is where we start to build up some of the tangibles. The most important really is the scaling. So that's in building new plants and also developing technology. Going forward, whilst the intangibles are very, very strong, we may see some of those wax and wane a little. When we come to what is going to be a break going forward for the industry, it is going to be the inability of some of these companies to scale their products and develop high quality tech. So this actually is where we see some of the opportunities for incumbent meat companies. When we look at some of the key attributes for meat companies, their major ability often is to scale products and produce at scale. And then, as you can see down here on the bottom right, distribute those products. These are two areas where meat companies are very strong usually, and where actually a lot of these alternative protein companies are lacking. So this is where there could be those opportunities for meat companies. Other aspects really is that ingredient availability. Alternative protein production nowadays is absolutely tiny when we look at it on a global scale. So it's not too much of a constraint, but as the industry expands, that ingredient availability could perhaps be a little bit of a challenge. So as we see more capital flowing into the space, we see the development of these tangibles, and that in itself really starts to drive the capabilities. And at the moment, again, if you're trying to acquire customers, you can do it with some of these intangibles, and that helps particularly with vegan consumers and into vegetarians. That's not so difficult. Customer acquisition here isn't a challenge. It's when we start to move into the much bigger sort of market, which is the flexitarians, and trying to convert meat eaters across to these alternative products, that you really need the sort of capabilities across sort of the taste, texture, and sensory profile of these products. Those are absolutely fundamental. Cost control is a real challenge, and we need to try and bring the price of these products down towards sort of parity with meat, particularly if we want to expand to a wider audience. And then the convenience, and that's, given the sort of supply chain infrastructure we have now, that's not too much of a challenge. Realistically though, then when we get that is going to feed back in. So whilst at the moment there's a lot of noise around the space, it is certainly expanding, but it's coming from a very, very low base. But as this starts to gain more momentum, particularly in the 5 to 10 year horizon, this is when we start to see predict a real acceleration of this market. Why will Asia accelerate? I mean, so we can look at this from a number of angles. This really did start as a Western trend. There is a bit of a time lag, but this is now pushing pretty aggressively through Asia. You're seeing more and more products coming to market. But again, bear in mind, this is coming from a very low base. That is, as we're saying, it is proving that momentum can be sustained. We're starting to see more and more investment pouring into companies throughout the region. And this growth, even through COVID, has actually accelerated. So again, it does sort of show that Asia is going to remain an interesting place for this. When people talk about Asia, they often sort of refer back to the sort of ingrained vegetarianism in the region, and place this as one of the key priorities. I sort of see both sides here. I think there is certainly an opportunity here, but having that ingrained vegetarianism, it also poses a little bit of a threat to the development of these products. More and more, we're seeing products coming to market which are not of a good enough quality standpoint. It's improving, but to be able to expand through Asia, you have to be very clear in differentiating yourself from these traditional vegetarian products. So if you can do that, there are certainly opportunities, and companies starting to do that, but it's certainly not the complete strength that everyone always talks about here. As I said, there are some quality point issues for local products. This is the case in Western markets, but particularly through Asia, there have been a lot of products coming to market which fall short of consumer expectations. But as we're seeing more and more investment going into these products, innovation is developing, and we are expecting an acceleration of the product quality. Consumer education is certainly an important point, and as with the provision of technology nowadays and the democratization of information, educating consumers on new products is becoming increasingly easy, and that's going to certainly help accelerate the trend through Asia. ASF in China, whilst causing subtleties over some of the products, that is going to create an opening with the protein shortage that ASF is obviously driving in the markets. And finally, distribution. Whilst obviously already quite prevalent, we are seeing the spread of QSR chains and e-commerce throughout Asia, and that in itself is going to drive an opportunity for meat alternatives in the region. When we touch then on the sort of two real distribution channels, the first really is the expansion of food service. You can see China and Japan are already big markets for KFC and McDonald's. We've just listed some of the sort of key outlets across the region. We are starting to see these QSR chains expand rapidly through Asia. And one of the interesting points is, as if you can partner with some of these chains, it gives you an immediate platform to roll out your products to a wide consumer audience. So again, that is one of the key sort of attractions of partnering with the sort of food service operators. One of the other positives, you definitely get some sort of clarity on the sales volumes and contracts. And for small companies, that really helps with sort of inventory management and your balance sheet. One of the key aspects as well is when we've seen people trying to sell direct into retail, there are sometimes issues about how these products should be sort of cooked and then consumed. By putting it out through the food service channel, that sort of enables you to produce the product to the optimum standard and helps you to build that brand equity around quality. The final real advantage here really is that if you can sort of partner with one of the major QSR chains, it enables you to sort of build your brand and awareness of your product with actually slightly more limited costs. So again, partnering with the food service channel, this is sort of one of the key sort of aspects for expanding products through the region. The other side, if we're looking at retail, pushing products into retail can often be slightly costly if we're going for the bricks and mortar approach. Going through the sort of e-commerce channel, it provides a really interesting outlet for startups. There are far fewer financial demands, and you can actually very accurately target your consumer groups that you want to sort of buy the products through, again, KOLs, other marketing channels. Asia is already the leader in e-commerce, and with COVID-19, we've seen a rapid acceleration of that. You've seen companies such as Grab, which are ride-hailing apps. They have now pivoted across to, well, some part of it is food delivery, but they've also done it for groceries. This has actually really helped facilitate the growth of e-commerce through the region. The growth is going to slow as sort of we see a recovery from COVID-19. But again, those growth rates are going to sort of remain pretty impressive. And this is going to be something that's really sort of fundamental to help these sort of alternative protein companies expand their sort of sales and distribution throughout the region. So when we look at what is this all going to look like, I think it's important to sort of touch on the fundamental differences between Western markets and Asia. When we look at here, we're working on this at the moment, so this is still very much a hypothetical. But when we look at the growth of alternatives, so the sort of red here, there is a clear difference between Western markets and Asian markets. This again is just looking at per capita consumption. There's a slight dip in 2020, but generally our expectation is for the next 5 years, alternative protein to start to expand through the US market. In the 5 to 10 year horizon, it's where we see a strong growth. And the fundamental point to make here is that it's probably going to largely going to cannibalize some of the meat consumption. So as you can see, our projections are that in the next 10 years, meat consumption in the US could already be trending down, and meat alternatives is certainly going to take a lot of that share. If we come across to China, again, we're working on this very closely at sort of developing this model out. You can see per capita consumption of protein has come down the last 2 years with ASF in China. Our expectation is that going to build up pretty strongly to 2025, and again, slow perhaps to 2020, 2030. The fundamental difference, though, when we look at China, is that the growth of alternative proteins is going to augment the supply of incumbent meat products, whether pork, poultry, fish, and beef. We see this again throughout Asia. There are going to be a few exceptions, perhaps when we look at, say, Japan, Korea, Singapore, where we might see a model slightly more akin to what we're expecting in the US. But generally, when we look at Asia, we expect these products to sort of complement the expansion of meat consumption in the region. And I think it's important to remember that how ingrained, or sort of how meat products are very aspirational in Asia. And again, per capita consumption levels are generally pretty low. So there is certainly a strong upside there. Meat alternatives are likely to expand, but again, it's going to be in conjunction with that. So we don't see meat alternatives as such a strong threat in Asia as we do perhaps in some of the Western markets. Now, when we look at Asia, it is still very much in its infancy when we compare it to some of the Western markets, but it is growing very, very quickly. There are a number of advantages, and one of the important ones is that increased ingredient availability, and companies are increasingly looking to leverage that. In terms of the companies we're seeing it going into, we're seeing a range of startups and corporates. So Shiok Meats, for example, here again, a very small startup doing cell-based seafood in Singapore. We then also see CP Foods, so one of the biggest meat companies in Asia, again, investing in this space and bringing products to market. So again, there is a lot of capital going into this, and that's only going to continue, again, because the return on investment on this tends to be incredibly attractive. These are a range of Asian companies going in. The quality is starting to improve, but again, because we've seen that shortfall in quality for some markets around Asia, that has driven the sort of entrance of some of these Western companies. And again, that's something that's only going to gain weight. Largely at the moment, it's coming with exported products to the region, but we are seeing more and more of these looking to identify ways to put assets on the ground to produce locally. When we come down into the types of products, at the moment, there is a lot of focus on these Western style products, whether it's the KFC chicken nuggets, the Beyond Burger down here, you can see, or even some into the Impossible, but you can see the sausage product as well. We tend to see a lot of this geared towards Western style products. And I know sausages sometimes can be used in a lot of the local cuisine as well. With the sort of expansion of the modern QSR chain, and particularly with Western brands coming into the market, there clearly is this opportunity for these sort of products. When we start to look more, however, at some of the sort of Asian products and the Asian companies that are coming to market, these are traditionally, well, they're starting to focus more and more on how they can adapt these alternative meat products to local cuisine. So whether you have the dumpling market, for example, in China at 5 to 6 million tons, this is a big, big market. And what we're seeing is that a lot of the Asian companies coming up with products, they are really trying to position themselves to sort of target some of these local cuisines. This is starting to change, and we are seeing more and more of these Western companies starting to develop products and tailor them towards the local taste. At the moment, when it's still a very much a niche market, it is still okay to focus on some of these Western style products. But as you want to increase your addressable market, there really is a need to start to tailor your products towards the local cuisine. And that is certainly something that these Western companies are going to start to do. When we look at pricing, there is a fundamental difference here. And what we have, these are just spot market prices done through the e-commerce channel in China about a month ago or so. You can see on the left here, pork belly, beef mince, and chicken breast. Again, the prices we have here are considerably lower than what we have on the right here, which is the meat alternatives. One thing to draw your attention to is the light green shading here. These are tofu style products, so that sort of older generation of meat alternatives. These are, again, generally there are exceptions, tend to be a little cheaper than the incumbent meat products. And this provides one of the challenges. If you are going to come in with an alternative product, it certainly needs to be very differentiated from these products on quality. And if you can do that, it enables you to sell them at a premium. Now, if we look on the furthest right, you have two Beyond products here. One is the mince, one is the burger. And you can see that these are positioned at a very significant premium to both incumbent meat products and some of the traditional meat alternatives. It's important to note that sales volumes here are tiny. So this is not necessarily representative of the market. And as the market starts to grow and mature, these prices are going to have to come down. Now, there's another separate issue here, and this is a product called Omnipork. It's from Green Monday, so one of the major alternative meat companies in Asia. They are certainly starting to position themselves differently to the Western companies coming in. Firstly, they are very much trying to tailor their products to the local culinary culture, but more importantly, they are trying to push more and more towards price parity. At the moment, again, you're very much a niche in the market, so there is no need to sort of really lower your prices, and the product and the demand in the market really enables you to sell your products at a premium. But as you want to start to hit a larger addressable market, those prices are going to start to come down. And we see it already. The Asian companies tend to have a slight discount in their products to the sort of Western products coming into the market. But again, I think that is going to slowly start to balance out. And in general, these alternative products, as the market expands, are going to trend down to try and become more in line with the meat incumbents. One of the things, again, if we can see it on food service, on the top here we have Deco, so one of the major fast food chains in China. You can see on the left, again, this is an alternative chicken product at about 31 for the entire meal. It's about 23 RMB for the standard chicken product. And you can see that's about a 35% premium for the alternative protein product. Same again at Starbucks on the left, it's about 35 RMB for, again, an alternative meat sandwich, 29 for the standard product, so about a 20% premium. At retail and at food service at the moment, there is a considerable premium attached to these alternative products. But as I said, that is going to start to narrow as we start to see these products evolve and the market slowly start to sort of mature. So really just to give some concluding thoughts here. First of all, when we look at this, COVID-19 has really started to accelerate and modernize sales channels in Asia. As we start to see the sort of growth of modern retail, the growth of sort of the QSR channel, and particularly the growth of e-commerce, these provide fantastic outlets for these meat alternative products and are going to be an imperative aspect of the scaling of these meat alternatives through the region. One thing though, we talked about the acceleration of meat alternatives. It's certainly not going to destroy the meat market anytime soon. Asia, I really want to emphasize this, Asia is certainly going to remain a major meat demand growth region. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind here that meat alternatives are going to expand, but so are meat products, again, throughout the region, with maybe one or two exceptions when we perhaps look at Singapore and Japan and Korea on a sort of 10-year horizon. But generally, there is still a considerable opportunity for meat products in the region. So we talked about some of the drivers for meat alternatives, about animal welfare, environment. They are going to remain pretty limited. Health is going to be the main driver, and we're going to see that sort of shift in focus from health being very much focused on safety in Asia. That is starting to evolve, and we're seeing that more and more focused on actually the sort of nutritional benefits of food. And as we've seen, that is going to be an important driver for alternative meat products through the region. Affordability, and we talk about this a lot. Affordability is going to be absolutely fundamental, and it's going to be a key purchasing criteria for a large share of the population through Asia. Again, there are going to be exceptions when we look at the top end of the market, but when we start to look at how alternatives are going to sort of grow through the region, there will certainly be some targeting that sort of premium top end of the market. But as we start to see meat alternatives expand through Asia over the coming decade or so, it's really going to be how they can lower their price to sort of appeal to more of the mass market and compete more directly with the incumbent meat products. So how they can bring that down to become much more affordable, that's going to depend how successful they can be at doing that is going to be sort of quite important in determining how quickly these can expand in volume terms through the region. When we talk about meat alternatives, it's important to not get completely sort of confused with sort of all the press we see at the moment about how quickly they are expanding, how much of a threat they pose to the meat industry. They certainly do pose a little bit of a threat when we look at Europe and the US, but when we're looking at Asia, these products are coming from a very, very low base. And through most of the region, these are going to actually act to augment protein supply. So again, there may be one or two threats, but generally, actually, these are going to augment supply, and it just poses itself or positions itself really as an opportunity for a range of people throughout the supply chain. Now, one thing that is clear at the moment is that whilst there are a few exceptions through Asia, generally the quality is not meeting the exact level that consumers really want. It is starting to improve, but that is what is presenting a clear opportunity for both imported products, but also the tech. So again, depending on where you sit through the supply chain, there are certainly a range of opportunities to bring in Western products into the Asian market to help it expand. Finally, really, that when obviously the title of the presentation is Threats and Opportunities, whilst there are an element of threat, I really see this mainly as an opportunity, and that's really for most actors throughout the value chain. The important thing to learn, though, really is actually there are some opportunities to sort of look at how these products are positioning themselves, how they're marketing themselves, because there are certainly sort of lessons that can be learned from that and are sort of applied to meat alternatives, to incumbent meat products. So whilst yet there is a bit of a threat, generally, I personally see this as a big opportunity for anyone acting throughout the value chain. So thank you very much for your attention. I just want to finish by saying that we've launched a study at the moment looking at the sort of expansion of alternative proteins in China. What's the real opportunity there? We're close to wrapping that up. That should be finished by the end of this month. And if anyone is interested in that, please do let me know. But thank you all for your attention. And if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you.